invitation to talk about this. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. It's also one of the most challenging and difficult subjects. You've seen lots and lots about artificial intelligence and machine learning in the news. You're going to keep seeing more about it because it's going to affect all of us. It affects amateur radio directly in several ways. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to walk through a lot of the different ways that it affects us, what artificial intelligence is, what machine learning is, where they cross over, what is not artificial intelligence. And we're going to walk through a couple of different technical projects from amateur radio. All right, so anybody recognize the scene? Yes, 2001. You remember Hal was the computer.
1968.
Can Hal promise us that it's safe to use?
Sure.
No, it can't. So we're going to hear echoes of this and also a little bit of a counter argument about how useful artificial intelligence and machine learning is. But first, I have some jokes for y'all. Why don't data scientists trust linear regressions? They're always trying to fit in. Why couldn't the restaurant open a new data center? Well, they didn't have enough servers.
Oh.
This is good for October. What's the most haunted data type? It's a Boolean. I saw a great movie about databases the other day. I can't wait for the sequel. Where do computers keep their money? A data bank. Why was the scatter plot sad? She couldn't find any meaningful relationships. And what did the data scientists say to their boss? I need a raise. So about me, you can find a little bit more about me, what I'm up to on LinkedIn. I'm on other social media as Abraxas 3D. Please reach out anytime if you want to talk about open source digital radio, want to talk about machine learning, or anything else in amateur radio. Artificial intelligence and artificial life has been around for a really long time. As humans, we have thought about this. We've made art about this, poetry. We have made attempts at machines dating back all the way BC. Hero of Alexandria, hero is a name and not a title, was this fellow who is credited with the first vending machine, the first attempt to automate giving you something for a little bit of coin. We have Pygmalion, and he fell in love with the statue he carved. This is a myth, a story. It's been used and reused in all sorts of art and poetry and even movies for thousands of years now. We have Al-Jazari. He made human machines. He wanted to have wait staff and hand washers and a robot band of musicians. And Da Vinci, you might have heard of him. Now, you may have heard of him for all sorts of reasons, but he was also really, really into automation and robotics, as well as all the other stuff that we may know him for. Probably my favorite is this artificial duck from 1735. Well, it's French, so it ate and pooed really, really well, toured all around the world, and it was so popular that they wore it plumb out. There's not a scrap of this poor little duck left. We have Metropolis, the movie, and it's interesting for two different ways for us tonight. The story itself is about automation and robotics, robots that are intelligent, and the relationship between the worker and the robot. Another interesting thing about this particular movie is that it was colorized a few years ago using something called generative adversarial networks, which is artificial intelligence. So this movie gives us two big examples of how this comes up in our history. We also have another movie from 1934. A scientist makes machines do our dirty work. A protege doesn't cooperate, things literally blow up. And it goes on. We see in the 1940s lots and lots of movies and comic books about automatons or robots. By 1948, one of my favorite people, Claude Shannon, came up with information theory, and he invented Theseus, the artificially intelligent mouse that would learn how to go through a maze. 2001, we have the Space Odyssey. We have Colossus, the Forbin Project. We have Westworld and Logan's Run. We have all sorts of expert systems in the 1980s from computer science, where we start, instead of just writing about what we want, we start actually trying to make it in computer code. So 1970s, 1980s, we start seeing programming that it tries to encapsulate, it tries to figure out what artificial intelligence is, and we start actually being able to use them. Expert systems in the 1980s were pretty good at diagnosing medical conditions. They were pretty good at advising lawyers. And you had to be pretty rich to afford it, but we can start seeing these things actually happen. We have the movie War Games, 1983. Remember Joshua, the only winning move not to play, after it learned over and over again that there really isn't any good way to win tic-tac-toe, Hunt for Red October. And then something interesting happened. In the 1990s, we have what is now called the AI winter, where everything kind of went dormant for a little while. We had all of this progress in computer science in the 1980s, and they were like, well, in order to get really good at this, in order to be able to use all these big neural networks, we need computers that have not been made yet. They're going to pull so much power, and they're going to have to be so complicated and so expensive. I guess we better just wait. Wait, we did. And in the 2000s, AI started to get a revival. We start to see machine learning, a type or the expression or the implementation of AI, machine learning. We start to see it work a lot better. And now we come up to our current time. We're living in the 2020s, and we now have massive venture capital, huge amounts of money, the right type of computers, and enough of the computer science to where we start seeing things called LLMs, or large language models. And in parallel, we see machine learning start to actually work. So 2,000, almost 3,000 years in the making, and we're living through a tremendous time where this stuff is changing very fast and is going to affect us and is going to be very disruptive. So what is AI and what is ML and what are these LLMs? Sort of like the representation of sort of the landscape from a top level view. You all can hear me okay? Okay. So the point of this slide is take it seriously, because like the transistor changed the world, AI has changed the world, will keep changing the world. There we go. Okay, so this gives you a visual organization of what is what. Over there on the left, you see the little monitor. How can I help you today? Very helpful little LLM, large language model, like ChatGPT, or Claude, or Gemini, or any other ones. How many of you have used a large language model? That's quite a few. I'd say maybe about half of the room.
Don't know.
How many of you have never heard of a large language model before? Okay, a couple of folks. So a large language model, these are the things that are probably the most visible and most talked about in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning today. What they are is a predictor. You ask a question and it will generate an answer, and it is making a prediction of what the most likely, most English sounding response to your question or your comment would be. Does it have a soul? No. Does it have emotions? No. Does it have a world sense or sentience? No. It is very complicated predictor of what it should answer with in English or German or French. It is or Japanese or almost any language. This is very powerful. And humans, we like to pack bond with things. We like to put our, find something in common with it. It really feels a lot of the time like a person is answering back to you. And that is just the power of a really huge neural network predicting what the best possible answer to your question is. It can answer questions about source code. It can answer questions about components. It can answer questions about regulations. It can answer questions about gardening, about musicians, about history, lots and lots of things. Now, this is in sort of the realm. You can see that there's a big circle for machine learning there on the left that kind of overlaps the LLM. Machine learning is the engineering part of AI. It's the application, the specific tasks, particular data, the implementations. On the right, you see a circle that says artificial intelligence. This is the theory. This is the science, the theory of operation. Lots of people, philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, computer programmers, computer scientists have been thinking about what is intelligence and how do we learn, how do we remember, how do we figure that out, and how do we automate it? When you take the theory and you take the practical implication and you overlap them, what so many people are spending so many tens of billions of dollars on is the search for artificial general intelligence. So an LLM just predicts the language. They're after something else. They're after something that really does have human level intelligence. There's a lot of people who believe that this will never happen, that it's impossible. And they're spending a lot of time trying to figure out a proof, to prove it one way or the other. There's a lot of people that are spending an awful lot of money who think that it will happen. So people are placing their bets. And when I say that it is the most expensive bet in the history of technology, I'm not wrong. More money has been spent on AI and LLMs and things like this on this page, on this slide, than any other technology. It's surpassed all of the other things that we've ever spent money on. So this will have an effect on all sorts of things. You can imagine that if they're right, and we do get to have automated general intelligence, that will change our world. And if they're wrong, that's a really big market crash. So LLMs are the most visible product, and this is where most of the action is. Anything dealing with text that you can type in gets a big boost from an LLM. There are many practical applications of LLMs in the amateur radio right now. Text-to-speech is a big one. Turning text into speech that sounds not like a robot saying it. We've been able to do that for decades. But it sounds like the person whose voice it was trained on. Back just a few years ago, this is where I'd say it may not be the first person to do it in amateur radio, but this was one of the first serious attempts. Jerry Hall, W5NYV, and this is just clipped right out of the Facebook discussion that he was having with some other hands. So what he did is like, this text-to-speech is really amazing. I'm going to use this on the air. And he has some samples here, and people are like, wow, that's really, really good. This is different than you recording yourself as the outgoing message for a contest. This adapts to who you're talking to, what you're saying. So it's different every time. And then Jamie Dupree said, hey, guess what? I'm using it now to fill in on in contests. And also, if you heard me on a contest, guess what? I was already using this. This was 3 years ago. And then Jerry said, gosh, and I'm going to look at he's talking about using it also for super check partials. So not just to sound exactly like the person and sound like not robotic or repetitive, but to adapt to the contest, but also to do some of the chores in the contest. And that quote right there about $500 has fallen by a factor of 10 in just a few years. You can I should probably say, what's happened since then? People are automating their entire contesting with large language models and a little bit of automation, throwing in like a model context protocol, an MCP, which is a way for you to use the LLM and hook it up to tools. This is controversial because contests, shouldn't they be done by people when you are competing and you're the one talking and wearing out your voice and staying up till 3 a.m.? Shouldn't you be competing against other people? Shouldn't you know who else has totally automated their station? Should that be a different category? And these are the questions that the contest rules people are going to have to deal with. And some of them fully aware of this and already are trying to.
Almost like doping in sport.
Yes, he said, if you didn't hear him, he says it's almost like doping, or let's say enhancements for sports. If you were competing against people that all they do is work out and eat right and got the gumption, that's fine, that feels fair. But if you are taking steroids, well, maybe you should compete only against the other people taking steroids. So yes, it's a very good comparison. In amateur radio, a lot of people are using LLMs to write software for amateur radio. So LLMs for writing software is hit or miss. So the code requests for things like dashboards and JavaScript and some Python, things that use any sort of HTML, excellent results. And what it boils down to is out there on the internet, what did that LLM train on? How much training data was available for that particular programming language? And are there enough examples of that particular type of problem for you to get a really good prediction on, hey, you want to have all the call signs displayed. Hey, I know about call signs. I have about 60 gigabytes worth of code that all sorts of people have written about handling call signs. I can help you. Okay, that's a good example. But there are places where it kind of falls down. Now, this is an article on our website. It's one of our news items. Back in 2022, we decided to try to use ChatGPT for a serial decoder for digital communications in the language VHDL. VHDL is used to describe hardware for an FPGA or field programmable gate array. Now, this fell down. It did not work well. It was able to get the inputs and the outputs, but the guts of the block diagram were kind of messed up. And it's because there's just not a lot of VHDL out there for the LLM to go steal and train on and then regurgitate back to you. So it's all about the data. When you hear LLMs, think training data, garbage in, garbage out. So then here's another one. Look, just a year or two later, we used Claude large language model to help us out with assisting code and visualizations for a link budget in a different language, in Python. This was in a Jupyter Lab notebook. So the experience was different. There's an awful lot of Python code out there, and it came up with some really, really nice code examples. Still, oh yes, go ahead.
So on the other end, if you try the Verilog, VHDL example again, 2 years, 3 years later, it probably would do much better than it did before because it's advanced a lot, like even in just the last 18 months.
Yeah, if you didn't hear him, he says, retry the VHDL example or try a different language like Verilog, which is true. The LLMs do get updated on a semi-regular basis, maybe once a year.
Fine, Mike.
So we still had some cases, even though in general, this did a better job with Python, a language where you have a lot more examples out there. There's a lot more, and it was right up the middle in terms of like coming up with scientific equations for link budget. But it was very confidently wrong, which is a hallmark of LLMs. They sound like they're very sure of themselves, and they can be very, very wrong. It's not a replacement for a person. If you treat it like a well-meaning but possibly inexperienced student, assistant or intern, that's the right way to approach it. Another one of the projects in an Open Research Institute, one of our volunteers, you might know Charles Brand, he decided he wanted to train a model on amateur radio magazines and then have it to attempt to pass a license exam. So take all of the stuff out there inscribed or, archive.org, all these radio magazines, sending the newsletters, all of that. There were some mixed results. It has not quite yet managed to pass it. And this shows the difference between what's in the magazine and what's on the license exam. He deliberately kept out the stuff that was like, okay, here's the answers in the license exam, because it's just a lookup. He wanted to see if exposure to the things that we write to and for each other would organically, magically result in automated passing of the license test. Hasn't happened yet. Okay, and since then, Charles has started working on what he's trying to do is take GNU Radio, which is a DSP framework, and hook it up to an LLM. And instead of slogging through the process of dealing with GNU Radio with its very steep learning curve and it changes constantly and is kind of persnickety about how you hook everything up, gosh, wouldn't it be great if you could just read, have an LLM read the underlying code, which is Python and C++, and then make me radio. Mixed results there too. It's very hit or miss. So if you're familiar with filters and the Q factor of a filter, that's what you're dealing with here. It's very notchy. Sometimes it nails it. Sometimes it's so wrong that you're wondering if that is even part of the new radio. So there is a dark side of artificial intelligence and LLMs. One way of interpreting how they have been trained is just theft. Scraping the entire internet, stealing books, the authors did not give them permission to train on, taking down scraping entire sites, and then training the models on that. Borrowing, it's all public domain. If you didn't want us to use it, you shouldn't have posted on the internet anyway. Okay, so this will get worked out probably through the courts, but I'm just going to say right now, they're basically trained on theft. There is bias in LLMs because what is on the internet is not the sum total of human knowledge. And it is not the total of our experience with each other, for each other. We're missing a lot if you just scrape the internet to make an artificial intelligence. Sometimes they're just plain wrong. They'll make shit up. It's called hallucinations. There's no liability. If you have an LLM and it tells you to make a circuit that hurts somebody, is it your fault? Is it the LLM's fault? Gonna have to sort that out. We see the similar problems in self-driving cars. If a self-driving car hits a pedestrian, what do? We're still working that out. When we talk about spending tens of billions of dollars on data centers, this means there's very concentrated profits in just a few hands. There's also very concentrated capability because no one can now enter this market. Are you going to catch up to $27 billion worth of spending? How? Massive power bills, lots of water consumption, and the sneaky thing, we've run out of content to train on. LLMs now have trained on the entire internet. What do you do then? There's a thing with recommendations. Lots and lots of AI and ML is used to power the recommendations that are made to us on Netflix for what's the next movie that you want to watch, or Facebook, what's the next reel or post that you'll see. These are used everywhere. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you automate it. When you automate it, you end up getting recommendations that will drive you to one extreme or the other. Why? It's not deciding that it wants you to be an extremist, but that it turns out it's easier to sell ads to somebody that has extreme views. A moderate, somebody kind of in the middle, a balanced thinker, very difficult to sell ads to. The recommendation engines push you to some sort of edge. And then thank goodness, we can reliably sell you ads. This is not, I'm evil in the castle and I want a bunch of extremists. No, it literally comes organically out of the process of a recommendation engine. We are going to have to deal with this, whether it's a regulatory thing or a market thing, or people wake up and go, wow, maybe I should take a break. Something will have to happen. Now we're going to talk about machine learning. This is a little bit different than LLMs. Machine learning is training a network to, when it gets new data, to give you an answer, usually to a very specific problem, such as component design. There's lots and lots of components out there. We've done a pretty good job of designing things like resistors and capacitors and stuff like that. But there's a lot of undiscovered country out there in the more interesting components. And wouldn't it be great if you could search the space a little better, or find all of those interesting little statistics, or transients, or just come up with a component that does exactly what you want. Network operations, machine learning is a star. Configuring a network is hard. Reducing technical debt, automated regulation, which does affect us a lot, transceiver design, and just in general documentation. To be able to throw designs at something and say, could you please just generate a manual for this? Customers have been yelling for 15 years for one. That's a big step forward. Here's an example that we did just over the past couple of years. You're familiar with the FCC. You're familiar probably with the ULS, the big licensing database where all the information for all of our licenses, commercial, amateur, Everything in between? Okay, so the ULS database has our license information. Now, an amateur radio license does not have your race. You don't write down what race you are when you get an amateur radio license. You don't write down your sex, and you don't write down your age. Now, I know that we used to keep track of that, but no longer. What we did is we used clustering, so it's a statistical term, clustering, to try to figure out what the race of an amateur radio licensees in the United States was. For sex, we used machine learning algorithm. And then for age, there was surveys, the old school hard way of finding out something when it's not already in a database. So what did we find? Well, for race, on the bottom right, that is the census results for the US from 2021. So those is the breakdown of all the different races in the census, but from 2020, the process through 2021. In the upper left, that's what we found by doing clustering. So you can see that the racial representation in amateur radio is a little different than what our census shows our basic demographics are. Now, when we used machine learning, we took all of the licensees. We took their name and we asked a machine learning algorithm, is this a woman's name or a man's name? Or is it unknown? Because there are some names that are used for both men and women in English. And we just said, okay, tell us. And when we got the unknowns, we used the for sure results as a baseline to kind of split the unknowns in that same category so that we could get one or the other. And we found, if you take all the licensees at that time, it's almost 14% women. Over time, over the 10-year space, the licenses are 10 years. So we took 1 year at a time, and we found out that it had fallen from 15% down to 12 by 2021. Now, this machine learning model is free. It's a library in Python. Didn't have to pay anything for it, and it's routinely updated. You can also, and we used English, even though there are a lot of non-English names in our database. There's Japanese hams that have US calls, Italians and French. That does change things a little bit, but we went ahead and went for English. So that's a use of machine learning to extract information from the FCC database that did not exist there before. And then Frank Howell was the one who did the age, and this is looking at the CW and phone contest, and he published a really, really nice article about this, showing how we could get younger people involved, and that it was something that we needed to do. We really need to get more young people involved in these contest activities. Okay, so that's a demographic challenge that we were able to address with a little bit of machine learning. How about a mode? AI ready. This article will be eventually in QEX. I don't know which issue, but they accepted it for publication. And what we did is a ready receiver that was made with machine learning. So how was this accomplished? Okay. When we talk about data, remember the data that goes into part? What goes in is very important, garbage in, garbage out, so it better be good data in. The very first thing we had to decide was how in the world are we going to get a whole big pile of RTTY transmissions in order to train our, intrepid little model. So what we decided to do, instead of sitting there and recording off of the air for years, was to use something called synthetic data. Now this is tricky. You got to make up synthetic data that's at least as good as what you would get in real life. But with radio transmissions from a particular mode, we can get pretty darn close. Here is two generated or synthetic RTTY transmissions. The one on the above, up, very noisy, 0 dB signal. It's barely in there. And the one lower right, 57 dB signal, booming, very, very clear. So what we did is we generated all sorts of different letters with all sorts of different SNR. The next thing that you do after you have a big population of things to work with is you do something called feature extraction. This is where you decide what exactly is important about that thing that you want to use machine learning to automate. So this is like the nuts and bolts of how you actually do this. Now we have a whole bunch of data. What about that data is really important? And this is an iterative process because you might guess wrong. Is it the amplitude? Is it the frequency? Is it time series? What the heck is it? Well, fortunately, there's lots of different help out there. You can use MATLAB or you can sit down and grind through Python. And we found that you could extract a couple of things about the signal and then use that. You label these audio files. You have something with tags. You have the letter that you sent. So we just started out with the letters and the figures. Single letters and single figures. Now, if you're familiar with RTTY, you might ask, hey, don't you have to switch back and forth between the letters and the figures? There's like an extra control character in there, right? Okay, we'll get to that. But we started off with just a single letter and a single figure at a time to see if we could get the machine to recognize this transmission. This, over on the right, this is a column of little boxes, and the arrows go from the top down. That's what a machine learning model looks like. This is the training process that all the data will go through. So a copy of the slides will be available, but it goes through a process where it learns features go with this letter, and it learns how to predict. This would be like if you took a person that has never seen a football game before, like never dimly aware that there's football, and you were told your job is to get them to be a referee good enough for an NFL game. What do? Oh boy, you're going to have to sit them down with an example of every type of play and let them see it, and you go, okay, this is, I don't know, somebody tell me something about football. Fumble? I don't know. Offsides? Okay, and you show it to them over and over and over again. These are the examples. These are you blow the whistle, you make the hand signal, look stern at the camera, Okay, so that's how you do it. And eventually they go, okay, I'm seeing some patterns. This stuff has to do with the offense and this stuff has to do with the defense. Well, machine learning for radio signals goes through the same process. Now, eventually, you take away all the examples and you say, okay, I'm going to show you something you've never seen before. Here's a play. Give me your best guess as to what went wrong. And if you get it wrong, you slap their hand. And if you get it right, thumbs up. Okay, and the training process goes on until they're accurate enough to turn them loose on the field. Same thing for signals. This is what these boxes are doing here. It's a process of reinforcing, here you go. And then, let me show you something new. Okay, you did good. Now we'll move on. So that's what this represents. And that's all machine learning training really is about. There's variations. There's devils in the details. There's optimizations. But what I've just told you is how machine learning is done. When you train, this is what you will see. The blue or the upper curve starts out at 0 and it rapidly goes up, and you can see it kind of creeps up slower and slower up towards 100%. That's accuracy. When we start the training process, it sucks. It gets everything wrong. It quickly figures it out because you said, no, that's an A, this is a T, that's an M. Got it? Okay. It gets better. And then over time, it will approach sort of a natural maximum. On the bottom is how sure it was of the, this is the loss. So this is unsureness, sorry. So it starts out being kind of like, yeah, my unsure level, my confusion level is a little high, but you can see it drops pretty fast because it's more and more confident of the result. When you see a model train and the accuracy goes way up and stays high, but the uncertainty stays high too, you know that you have a fragile model. Have you ever met somebody who's mostly right about their life decisions, but they're full of anxiety and very stressed all the time? That's the type of model we're talking about. Then sometimes you have people that sometimes make some bad decisions, but they're really confident they're bad decisions. That's another type of model. Know what you really want? You want something that's very accurate and also sure, positive, no stress. Sometimes when we make a model, depending on the data and depending on how complicated the problem is, sometimes that machine model can never really get to that ideal state. But hey, RTTY, not that hard. We got a pretty good model. Just looking at these curves, you can tell. But our first results, accuracy, 3.75%. Okay, so this is the scorecard for a model. On the vertical axis, the up and down, you can see it says true class. That's what we really sent. On the bottom was the predicted class, was O. I heard an O. Oh, no, you did not. Okay, so something went horribly wrong, and you go back to the drawing board. This type of chart, two-dimensional chart, is called a confusion matrix. And that's what it looks like when it starts to behave well. Okay, so you see that diagonal line? That's where, the A matches the A, the Z matches the Z. Now you can still see that there's a scattering out there of where it got it wrong, but remember, our data is noisy. We're throwing in stuff that maybe it could barely hear, so it's never going to be totally perfect. It got almost 94% accuracy with noisy, RTTY data. Oh, we're on the right track. Now you see we only have letters, and in RTTY you have letters and you have figures. Where's all the numbers? Where's the punctuation? We got to add that in. So we did. And still looking pretty good. We're now up to, this is 89.8%. And at first we're like, well, okay, 90%. Maybe it's just because we added some, oh, what's that up in the upper left-hand corner? Huh. Well, that doesn't look too good. What the heck is that? Well, the way you represent the data matters quite a lot, because those two little symbols up there, well, when you train, you're in ASCII. There are RTTY symbols. Well, when we entered them in, they didn't get all the way through to the training part. So like the bell, used to be a bell on RTTY, receivers, teletypes, stuff like that. Okay, so we were like, oh shoot. And that turns out that was where the missing accuracy was coming from, up there in that little corner. Because how can it get it right when you trained it on something and then you showed it something that wasn't represented in the training data? Well, that's not fair. That's like giving somebody a soccer play that was your NFL coach or your NFL rep, and then they're like, well, they're missing their pads, and I don't know why they're kicking the ball on the ground. So that's kind of what we did to it. But we cleaned it up, and what we did is it popped right out. It was like, okay, we're back now to about 93%. So we were just training on single letters and single figures at a time, but there is something very, very special about RTTY. The representation, I think it's like 5 bits, right? And well, you got more than 2 to the 5th, so we needed to include long stretches. We have to start including the control words that shift from, oh, I'm typing letters to I'm typing figures. That's a whole other character that's in RTTY. Oh, and I go back to the letters and I go up to the, now, when we started to include that, that means that we now are training not on a single one letter at a time, which is easy, but we have to generate what looks like strings or sentences, longer transmissions. So after more grinding and thinking, we did it. And there we have it. Now, some failed projects at ORI were a satellite contact predictor for the satellite service. Wouldn't you like to know who you're probably going to talk to? That'd be kind of fun, but there's not enough data. The quality of the data is really important, but the quantity is really important too. And it turned out there just wasn't enough contact data. It was not really, we're not able to do it. And since you have orbit predictors, that really takes care of almost all of what you need for a successful QSO. Another thing was digital pre-distortion. This is a fancy technique in digital signals, especially broadband or high data signals. We could not get diverse enough data for digital predistortion, and we had a lot of difficulty labeling it. Now, this has been done in the literature and in industry. We just weren't able to pull it off as an open source outfit. How does AI ML affect regulatory? I'm sure by this point, you're probably thinking of some ways. Right now, we do regulatory radio work like real estate code enforcement. We have the idea that there is like almost like properties. It looks almost like a city grid, so the spectrum chart, which I'm sure almost all of you have seen on the upper right, it sort of looks like a city block, and where you might have zoning for commercial here and maybe a park here and residential here and mixed use here. We approach regulatory law like that for radio. So what if you were able to have automated sort of allocation of your services and frequencies? This is called dynamic spectrum sharing. And it's sort of still like the real estate model, but instead of like land developed for a fixed use forever until it's torn down, you might have a coffee shop in the morning. It might turn into a restaurant around 11, and it becomes a train station at rush hour, and it's a bar at 8. So your radio services and the allocations that we like to think of as fixed, there is a lot of interest and pressure in making them dynamically shared, where it might sound a little scary, and it means the radios have to be more agile and advanced, but we do this already. You listen before you transmit. If there's a station already there, or if there's some sort of weird propagation thing going on, you move. Now, this might surprise you, but a lot of commercial services, this is absolutely alien thinking. So this dynamic spectrum sharing thing, it's scary and weird and all. We already do it as amateurs. For a regulatory future, if all radios have to cooperate together to get throughput maximized or to make consumers, customers, commercial ops happy, what do we do? So there's two big choices that we may have to confront, maybe later, maybe sooner. One's the national park model, that we keep everything exactly the way that it is, and it's promised to never be developed, and it's frozen in time, like a national park. Or we go with the flow, and we become part of the wider, sort of more wild landscape. So those are things, AI and ML are going to affect us just like this choice right here. It'll be pushed upon us at some point. The things that you need if you do dynamic spectrum sharing are bandwidth agility. You're going to need to change your bandwidth, which we already know how to do, and throughput optimization. This means that your transmitter and your receiver and the transmitters and receivers of other people, you're going to have to cooperate with them. AI ML and dynamic spectrum sharing mean that not just transmitters are licensed. There's already discussion at the FCC about how much they can enforce in terms of regulations on receivers. So we're not used to that. We're used to receivers being totally free. But in order to pull off some of this fancy stuff that we're talking about, your receiver is going to have to be a full and like also possibly be regulated. What do we need to do? Well, we need to continue to participate in emergency communications, that's for sure. That's something that we need to continue to be able to do. And we need to talk to our leaders and talk to the regulators and speak up about what we need in order to keep doing that. We need to quantify and qualify our spectrum usage. We need to figure out exactly how bands are being used. We need to speak up and say there is microwave activity, that there is HF activity. We need to avoid expensive solutions. When we're talking about super fancy receivers that coordinate with a central server, you're talking about expensive things. And now you're talking about maybe a backhaul that's internet. As amateurs, we have to be on guard for this. We have to go simple and avoid expensive solutions. And we need a practical curriculum to train people about AI, ML, and telecommunications. The things that we talked about tonight, need to be available and accessible. It's not taught very well. Sometimes people act like it's beyond us to learn. It is not. You can see it here tonight. Ordinary hams did all of those projects. All right, questions? Ask me anything. Happy to answer. Well, thank you. Thank you.
If you have a question, wait for the microphone.
Yes. Is that, yeah, use microphone so they can hear you. Is it on? Is it on? Okay. Yeah, we'll see it then.
So I was talking to someone about AI and some of the implications of coffee shop. They came up with the notion that AI doesn't stand for artificial and it doesn't start for intelligence. It stands for aggressive index. It needs a data set and then it needs to index the heck out. How accurate do you think that kind of assessment is? I think that is very accurate because as you've seen, the quality of the data and the amount of harassing of the data that you do is very high. So yes, aggressive indexing, being able to figure out what is important about the data due to something we call dimensionality reduction, because a lot of data, especially off of the air, if you know about IQ modulation, lots and lots of sampling theory, you can fill up a hard drive with an SDR, no problem. But very little of that data is probably related to your signal. So the indexing part about what she raises is extremely accurate. You need to figure out what is important about this stream of samples, reduce the size, and then you harass the heck out of it to give you something valuable out of that set. So yes, I would say that's totally fair. All right, questions or comments?
I've got a question on here on.
Oh, there's somebody on Zoom.
I got a question on Zoom. Can you take a Zoom question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was exposed to spectrum sharing and spectrum auctions and so forth, a thing called cognitive radios, which is an offshoot, I guess, of an SDR radio. And this is in play at this time with large corporations like Microsoft and whatnot filling the bill. That was a hot thing to talk about during these auctions and spectrum allocations. Isn't that one and the same of what you're doing now and calling it something newer?
Okay, hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Good. So yes, cognitive radio and software-defined radio are two very closely related concepts. Cognitive radio, this was the title of a paper, and I'm going to forget his name. Oh, did I do something wrong? No. So yes, cognitive radio is the idea that your radio can kind of think ahead for you, that let's say a cognitive radio in your car will know about what time every morning you go under the overpass so that you can still keep getting XM radio, or that it knows that you've now wandered off on a hike and that you're probably not going to want the FM radio station that is now edge of coverage. Things like that it learns the patterns of your behavior and it is able to make predictions and to serve you. So your radio is basically an agent of service. The idea of cognitive radio and the paper in the book led directly to more support and understanding and acceptance of software-defined radio, a more general idea that you can replace the hardware functions of a radio with software so that you can change them on the fly. All of this stuff, like the Zoom participant said, has been a big part of spectrum auctions and talking about what to do with spectrum, because when you start selling or licensing or allocating spectrum, you have to make some decisions about how it's accessed and about what the radios are capable of. And so, yes, all of these things are related. They would say cognitive radio is light machine learning, and a software-defined radio is not something that has learned. A software-defined radio is something that is extremely flexible. It's waiting to be told what to do. So a software-defined radio might be a component of a cognitive radio system, or it might be a component of a machine learning system. And that's how I would define it. And yes, these discussions and the fact that they're software-defined radios, a lot of people in the regulatory world may think of them as threats. Some of them think of them as the best possible thing that could ever happen. Some regulatory and industry folks want them to be required. Some want them to be excluded completely. So it's an ongoing, unfolding story, and with lots of people battling back and forth. So I hope that's my perspective on your excellent question.
Thank you, Mark. Any other online questions? Comments?
I have a question for all of you. What should the next open source sort of educationally focused project be? What should we tackle at ORI?
Medical advancement.
Okay, so just in general medical advancements, or is something about radio? Medical advancements are extremely important, so I would echo that. We were involved with a medical device for sensor fusion. Sensor fusion is when you have a bunch of different sensors on your body, and you do a little bit of learning or a little bit of AI or a little bit of coding, and you end up with more information than just the sum of the sensors. And for medical, this is extremely important. You may take a bunch of different sensors that are relatively inexpensive, and then you're able to draw big conclusions from it that otherwise would be impossible to get. And we did not get that particular grant, but we got pretty darn far on it. And the reason that we were able to apply for it was because of the things that we learned in the amateur radio field. The things that we learned by doing like the AI ready, things that we learned just messing around with LLMs, we were able to apply that to something for health. So I thank you. And yes, we haven't tried anything since then, but I think it might be time to go back around and look and see if we can promote open source in medical.
Thanks, Pete.
Any radio projects that anybody can think of, or any regulatory projects that we might want to look at?
Grab a mic.
Our exposure model having increased density, increased duty size, the demands that are on wireless.
Oh, the question was, what about RFI and RF? Yes, thank you. What about RF exposure? So if we increase radios because of all of the new demand and all of this stuff going on, what happens then? That's actually a big deal. There has been at least some movement in RF exposure with some updated rules. Unfortunately, this tends to lag rather than lead. And nothing happens until somebody either sues or proves a harm or gets enough people together to where, and that's why the standards tend to come out after some concern gets raised. The role of machine learning in there could be pretty important. It would depend on collecting good data. So you'd have to collect data from a rural versus a suburban versus an urban population. And then you'd have to look at a very broad spectrum of, are these health problems that people are having, and where in the world would they come from? And can we tie this to increased exposure? Because I'm sure if any of you live in a city or an apartment and you have tried to use your radio, that you may have noticed that there's a lot of noise out there from lots of different sources. And the noise floor will only go up, especially in urban areas, with increased amounts of radios out there. So it's an excellent question. I don't really have a great answer for it, other than we can use machine learning and these automated sort of tools to find relationships that we may not ever be able to find just waiting around for people to report it. Yes, sir.
So I want to get back to the state that you just went over when you were talking about RFI. So how does that play in? Does that start to be in the system? Then you start to use AI to hold each station.
Yeah, so from the okay, so from a practical point of view, a machine learning receiver can deal with RFI quite well, even if it wasn't specifically trained for RFI, but if it was trained for general noise. So when we talk about radio frequency interference, there's harmful interference, there's deliberate interference, and there's background, ordinary, natural interference. All of these things can be dealt with by a machine learning receiver because you can train for each of these. So the whole field of RFML, a whole lot of it has to do with RFI and becoming more resilient against RFI. Whether it's narrowband or broadband, it doesn't matter. So that's a very active area. There's another, I know you didn't mention regulations, but RFI and interference drives our current regulatory model. So interference complaints and avoiding interference complaints between people that have these, that have services, the commercial services, is a really big deal. And AI/ML is expected to help there. Now, a lot of the industry folks don't know exactly who's going to do the work to help them, but they are expecting that interference will be mitigated by machine learning techniques, that they'll be able to work it into their products, and that the dynamic spectrum sharing will go a long way towards that. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of proposed regulations right now, because there's an argument that we are at a point right now with the current regulatory model where there's a lot of law jams that have to do with interference, and that no one's budging. Like, we're not going to allow that secondary system on our frequencies because they'll interfere. Now, they need to prove that, but that's where the logjam is. And so with nobody budging, it becomes very hard for new people and innovative services and different types of companies. It becomes very difficult for them to break in at all. So this is a hot topic at the US FCC right now. And then I think there was a, oh, okay.
Yes, Mike. Concerning the Emperor should work more on emergency communications to justify use of frequencies. And I know that there are exercises where amateurs can communicate with first responders and other government agencies in emergencies, and looking for an open AI project. Where, when, and how can the amateur radio service communicate with other emergency agencies while at the same time, being wary of the HIPAA requirements with transferring private information to someone should use it, etc. Big bucket. Did I express it well enough?
I think so. From a point of view of of amateurs that want to help in emergencies, like most of us really want this to stay. We want to keep doing it. We care about it. It's one of the justifications for our allocations. If all of the professional public response people use super fancy radios that do frequency hopping, that reshape the signal, that change the modulation, and we show up with an ICOM, what do? We probably get assigned to inventorying toilet paper at the hospital or at the shelter, and that is totally fine. And if that's what we end up doing, and if that helps, that's what we will be doing. So that's one possible outcome of, everybody races ahead and has fancy radios. I think if you've ever volunteered in a place that has trunking radios, you have to then learn their equipment. You're not bringing yours. You're going to train with them. So instead of the technology, it needs to be talent. So moving forward, if you are emergency minded and you want to help, stop thinking of it in terms of technology that you bring. It is your talent that you bring. Us as communicators, that's where the value is, that we care about efficient communications, and we can learn anything. We really can. We can learn how to use the fancy radios of the future or the present. And I'm not sure I answered your question. The HIPAA thing, I don't know a whole lot about. I know that in an emergency, none of us really have to worry too much about that. And digital modes really, really help there. So instead of broadcasting it in the clear where it can be intercepted, the digital modes that we all have access to, I think that really helps quite a bit. So if somebody else knows more about that, maybe advise him. So I'm not an expert on HIPAA. Did that answer it? Or
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. My eyesight's not that good, so I appreciate the help.
Like your comment on interference and noise. I know the Defense Department, for example, has catalogs of signature sounds of all kinds of ships and other stuff in the water. We as hands deal with all kinds of interference. It'd be nice to have a catalog. This is the wall work, this is the web, this is the irrigation layer, this is the motor, this is the bottle condition, and all the sources of interference. So we can price them out and say, okay, this is what this waste level is made. Now we know what we're looking at.
That's a fantastic idea, and there is actually a start of this. There's a public database called the Signal Identification Wiki. What they've done is try to catalog mainly things like VHF up to through HF, and then all sorts of different signals. But there's people in that community that are interested in exactly that. Like, okay, well, not just cataloging all the cool military stuff that we see, HF link to whatever, to wow, never seen that before. Only see it once a year, number of stations, you know, that sort of thing. But there's that community for sure is interested in the interference side as well. What are the common interferers, you know? And this started out on like an interest on cataloging the shortwave interferers. So you have all sorts of different, you know, you try to interfere with shortwave stations. Okay, that's where it started. But it now is like it's in your house.